السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد الفاتح لما أغلق والخاتم لما سبق ناصر الحق بالحق والهادي إلى صراطك المستقيم، وعلى آله وأصحابه حق قدره ومقداره العظيم. وبعد، رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. وقال جل وعلا: إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد كما تحب وترضى بأن تصلي عليه. Again, may I complain once again? That was appalling, by the way. Once more, inshaAllah ta'ala, durood upon the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam loudly. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد طب القلوب ودوائها وعافية الأبدان وشفائها ونور الأبصار وضيائها وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Many of the modern day isms that we find in this quote-unquote modern world are linked with atheism. What are the implications of atheism on a ground reality? From a ground perspective, the recent released census, which is basically a survey which is taken from every household living in the UK, and there are certain questions which are asked on that survey, and the results are released every 10 years. Now, the previous census which was taken was in 2021. From the census which was released in 2011. With regards to the answers which were given about religion, there is a stark difference from those who associate with non-religiousness in 2011 and those individuals who associate with non-religiousness in 2021. In 2011, there were approximately 14 million people who said that they identify as a non-religious person. In 2021, that number has increased by 12%. It is now approximately 22 million people who now associate with what? Atheism. And this is a stark difference with what we have seen from the previous census. Now, atheism has now become an intellectual threat for Muslims in particular and religious people in general. What is atheism, first and foremost? To understand the reality of atheism, we must come to first and understand a definition of what atheism is. So atheism is basically the belief that there is no divine being. It is the rejection of a God. There is no supernatural. Atheism with regards to Islamic history, what relevance does it have to Islamic history? In the 8th century, meaning English-wise, there appeared a group called a Dahriya. Now the Dahriya were a group of empiricists. They believed that knowledge can only be gained through empirical knowledge, through empirical evidence. And they believed also that the cosmos, this physical world, is eternal. And they also believed that this world was created by 4 qualities. Now, many of the ulama of the past, they actually debated the Dahriya. For example, our Imam al-A'zam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala also debated some of the Dahriya and his conversations, and there's a famous story attributed to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala with regards to his dialogue with the atheist. That's very famous. There are many other scholars who have written about the Dahriya, like Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah ta'ala, who also wrote about the Dahriya, and likewise Imam Ibn al-Jawzi radiyallahu anh. Imam al-Ghazali said with regards to the Dahriya that the Dahriya are like ants on a piece of paper, and they are basically reductionists in the sense that they do not have the ability to raise their eyes from the ink on the paper and from the paper itself to see that who is writing the ink on that piece of paper. with regards to atheism from an Islamic perspective, atheism, the Arabic word for atheism is ilhad. Now ilhad comes from the root letters lam, ha and dal. Lahad means deviation in English. So lahad is also, if you have seen a grave, a type of grave which is dug is also a lahad, because when you dig that grave, a side pocket is created in that grave. So it's a deviation from the original grave. That's why lahad is called lahad. So ilhad, with regards to an Islamic perspective, is a deviance from the natural order. And the reason for that is that atheism is unnatural, and atheism is against intuitiveness, in the sense that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created fitrah, which is a natural disposition, an innate disposition in every single individual who has this natural inclination and an affinity to incline towards a supernatural being, towards a divine being, and an affinity to worship God. That's with regards to Islamic perspective. But with regards to the history of atheism, the first individual who used the word atheism was a British scholar called John Cheek. He died about in 1557. He used the word atheism first, and thereafter there are many different movements in order to resuscitate atheism in the popular culture within the UK. Within 1689, an individual called Leshizinski, he came up with the idea that there is no such thing as God, and God is in fact a creation of the human mind. Not far from 1689 was the advent of the 1700s, in which David Hume, notorious philosopher, and Voltaire who claimed that there is a reality such as deism. And David Hume, he contradicted and he started to object against necessary existence. Things like miracles, he rejected miracles. And likewise, he also had an issue with regards to the issue of evil and suffering. Now, continuing on, there have been different movements in order to reinvigorate and to reintroduce atheism into the popular culture. In the 1920s, there was an individual, in fact in the very advent of the 90s, there was an MP within the British Parliament, Charles Bradlaugh. He was an activist for atheism, and he tried to make atheism popular amongst the youth. Thereafter, there has been the group of the new atheists, who are basically the brand of new atheism today. The four main individuals, Dan Dennett, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, and the final individual who is called Sam Harris. These individuals represent new atheism today. Now, with regards to atheism, if a person holds on to atheism, meaning he believes that there is no God, he believes that there is no such thing as a supernatural being, there is nothing beyond this physical world. You see, an atheist, all atheists, in fact the majority of atheists, they hold the worldview and hold upon the worldview of philosophical naturalism. What is naturalism? Naturalism is the worldview that everything in this world, this physical world, is based upon blind, non-rational and random physical processes. That's what naturalism is. So anything in this earth and everything that you see of this physical earth, this cosmos, is based upon blind, non-rational, random physical processes. Now, if a person holds on to this worldview, I'm not saying all atheists believe and hold on to this worldview, I'm saying the majority of atheists hold on to philosophical naturalism. I've got to keep hold of time. I've got a lot of things to say, but inshallah ta'ala, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give me the ability to say it. Now, with regards to if a person holds on to atheism, there are many implications. Number one, if a person is an atheist, he can never say that a thing is objectively moral and a thing is objectively immoral. He can never say that murdering a young child is objectively immoral. You know, if you went home and you opened the TV and you came across BBC news and the headline was, "An old man kills a 5-year-old child." Now, what's the first thing that's going to come to your mind? This is wrong, right? Am I correct or wrong? Yes, this is wrong. This is objectively wrong. But an atheist can never say this. Why? Why is that? The reason for this is that objective morals, for a person to say that he objectively believes something is wrong. Remember, what is objectivity? Objectivity is the belief that something is moral or immoral without any influence of your personal emotions or feelings. Now, without any personal emotions and feelings, that means that the decision that you've made with regards to something being moral or immoral is based upon an external factor. Now, when the atheist is asked, what is that factor that you base your morality upon? They can say a number of things. Some may say that it is based upon the biological conditions that we live in. If a person says that, an atheist says that our morality comes from the biological conditions in which we live, and it's based upon how we have lived in this world, then this is also incorrect. The reason for this is, in fact, Charles Darwin himself said that it is quite clear that our morality does not come from our biological conditions. He gave the example, he said that if all humans were to become hive bees, meaning those bees who live in hives, he said that if bees were to, if we became hive bees, then our morals would change. Why? Because our morals that we would think first as humans were objectively moral, now they have become the complete opposite. Why? Because hive bees, a female hive bee, thinks it is okay to kill its biological brother, and a mother within the bees thinks it is okay to kill its fertile daughter. Now, when we are humans, we believe that it is immoral to kill a mother, objectively, without any justified reason. And when we were humans, we understood that it is immoral to kill our daughters without any justified reason. It's immoral objectively. But once our biological conditions change, then our morals have changed as well. So therefore, it cannot be that our biological conditions are the basis of our objective morality. Number two, if an atheist says that our morality is on the basis of social pressure, it's based upon societal norms, then this is also wrong. And the reason for this is that, number one, societal norms change. Yes, 50 years ago, to be a homosexual was frowned upon in this community. I'm not meaning Oldham, in the UK, yes. In the UK, it was frowned upon to be a homosexual. Now it's fine. Yes, in fact, if you speak up against it, then you are ostracized in community today. So, therefore, if you base your morals upon society, you can never have objective morality. You can never objectively say something is moral and something is immoral. If you base your ideas and your morality upon society, then how can you ever objectively say that what the Nazis did in 1940 against the Jews was objectively immoral? Do we have, as Muslims, we believe that this was immoral, right? Do we believe or not? What the Nazis did in 1940 was objectively immoral. But as an atheist, in that society, the large majority of people in Nazi Germany in 1940s believed that it was moral to do what they did with the Jews. So therefore, again, this is a fallacy. Now, there are many other ideas as well, but very quickly, I've got a limit on time. But if a person thinks it's biological conditions or he believes it's societal pressures, then that's a fallacy. It has to be something external, and that external being can only be God. And the reason for this is that God is maximally perfect, and God only orders that which is good, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God, is one of his names is Al-Bar. Al-Bar means what? The maximally perfect being. Whatever God has commanded, that will be good, because it is in his nature to be good. And whatever we see in terms of his commands are basically expressions of his own nature. So therefore, anything which he commands us to do will be intrinsically good. Now, some of the other implications of atheism, very quickly, is that under atheism, you are limited to no value. You as humans have no value at all. Why? Because every single thing I've explained, that atheists have their worldview on what? Philosophical naturalism, which believes that every single thing on this earth comes from non-rational, blind, random forces, physical forces. So if everything on this earth has come from blind, physical, random physical processes, then that means every single thing on this earth has no real value. How can you give value to humans? What is the difference then, according to atheism? What is the difference then between a human being and a chocolate rabbit? If I came and I smacked a chocolate rabbit, and I brought a hammer and I crushed the chocolate rabbit, and I crushed a human being, what's the difference under atheism? Nothing at all. There's no value. Both things are of the same value. If that thing, the chocolate rabbit, is made of physical, blind, non-rational physical processes, and the human is also made from blind, non-rational, random physical processes, what's the difference if I crush the chocolate rabbit or I crush the human being? Nothing at all. So you yourselves have no value if you believe in atheism. There's no ultimate value for human beings. And based upon this non-value of human beings, this totally crushes human rights. Human rights, which is based upon what? The sacredness of human beings. If you yourself have no value, how can you claim to be sacred then? So the whole human rights argument is totally crushed under atheism. Now, very quickly, how can we prove the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And does the Quran talk of atheism directly? Well, the Quran in fact does not talk of atheism directly, and it does not give you direct information with regards to atheism. But what it does do is it gives you questions to ponder over. And you know, sometimes questions, they are far more profound than direct information. Why? Because a question sometimes makes you think. If I say to you, there is only one God, that's it. You're going to listen to me, it's going to process in your mind, that's it. But if I say to you, tell me what logical and positive evidences do you have for rejecting God, you're now going to start to think about this. You have more time to ponder over this. So, number one, the Quran doesn't give you a direct information with regards to, or a logical evidence with regards to the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there is a certain 2 ayahs of the Quran which make you ponder over the existence of Allah. And that is in Surah Tur, verse number 35. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ أَمْ خَلَقُوا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ بَلْ لَا يُقِنُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ. And this is for you to ponder, every single one of you over here. Listen very carefully. أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ. Allah says, were they, meaning humans. Oh, it could mean anything really, anything in this physical world. Were they created from nothing? Or were they the creators of themselves? أَمْ خَلَقُوا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Or did they create the heavens and the earth? بَلْ لَا يُقِنُونَ. Rather, they have no certainty. Now, from these 2 ayahs, we can deduce 3 possibilities. We can extract 3 possibilities. Possibility number 1, the first ayah which was mentioned by myself was, which أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ. Was this physical world created from nothing? That's possibility number 1. أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ. Or did the created beings create themselves? That's possibility number 2. أَمْ خَلَقُوا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Or did they create the heavens and the earth? These are 3 possibilities we can deduce from these 2 ayahs. But there is a 4th possibility, and the 4th possibility is what? Is that the created beings were created by an uncreated creator. Now we're going to come to that finally, inshallah. But let me talk about the first point which is mentioned. The first point, which is what? أَمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ. Were they created from nothingness? In this physical earth, is it rationally possible for nothingness to come, for something to come from nothingness? Impossible. You can never have 0 plus 0 equals 1. Something cannot come from nothing. If something does not have or contain, if this, a water bottle was placed in front of me, and I have this glass in front of me, just imagine this was empty. A water bottle was placed, Jazakumullahu khairan, barakallah fikum. It makes it a bit easier. Right. This water bottle contains, what does it contain? Beautiful, mashallah. Very good. At least you're listening, yeah? So it contains water. Now, if I say to you, I placed this cup in front of you and I said, and this right now in front of you contains water. I brought an empty bottle of water and I started to pour it into the glass. And I said, look, the cup is now full of water. You'd think I'm insane. This is absurd. is irrational. How is it possible for an empty water or bottle to give the potential and give rise to a glass of water? So therefore, this is a very simple example. But if something as simple as a empty glass of water cannot give rise to a glass of water, an empty bottle of water cannot give rise to a glass of water, if something so simple cannot be possible, then how is it possible for this earth, with all of its complexity, with all of its design and this fashioning, this brilliant fashioning from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to come from nothingness? Nothingness is what? Nothingness is a lack of energy, a lack of movement, a lack of everything. That's nothingness. So it's impossible, it's a rational impossibility for something to come from nothing. So that example number one, or the first possibility, is cancelled out. Am khuliqu min ghayri shay, were they created from nothingness? That's impossible. Am humul khaliqun, the second possibility is, were they created of themselves? This is also a rational impossibility. How is it possible for something to create itself? Impossible. If a person says that something created itself, this would be tantamount to saying that thing was in existence and in non-existence at the same time. Because for something to have created itself, that would mean prior to its existence, it must have existed. In order to create itself, it must have existed prior to its existence. So it is impossible that this earth was present before its own creation. And when this earth has a beginning, therefore it has a creator. Now, the third thing, which is what? Am khalaqu samawati wal ard, or rather, did they create the heavens and the earth? Now, if we go to this possibility, that dependent and finite beings created the heavens and the earth, then we will ask, with regards to the heavens and the earth, what created you? And if you say that it was a dependent being, it was a finite being, then we will then question that finite and dependent being, what created you? And then if it is said that something else which was dependent and finite created that, we will then continue and continue. If we continue on this basis, we will continue to go and argue and question the existence of the prior thing upon an infinite regress. And this is a rational impossibility. So therefore, the fourth conclusion and the fourth point that we can make, which is, as mentioned in the Quran, the three possibilities. The first possibility, it cannot have come from nothing. Second possibility, they cannot have created themselves. Third possibility, a dependent being cannot create another dependent being, in the sense that it continues on an infinite regress, on a regression. So the fourth possibility is that anything which is dependent, if we ask what created it prior, then if it is said it was a dependent thing, then we must come to an end, and that end must be an uncreated creator. That creator which created the first cause, which caused the next cause, and the next cause and effect, and so on. So therefore we must come to the conclusion of an uncreated creator, of an unmoved mover, something that creates movement in something else, but itself is not moved, something that creates creation and gives life to other things, but itself is not been created and is eternal. Because if that thing, and that thing is what? We have to come to the conclusion that either it's the universe or it's God. But we've just discussed right now that the universe is finite. It's quite clear that this universe is finite. There is, remember, you know when we say something is infinite, there is no such thing as something being infinite in actual reality. In actual reality, not mathematically, in actual reality, there is no such thing as an infinite creation. Because anything which is present in this earth with all of its features has to be finite. Because if it's contained in this earth, it is dependent. And if it is dependent, it is finite. Anything which is dependent is something that could not have existed. Something which is not necessary. What's a necessary being? A necessary being is something that could, basically, its non-existence is impossible. So a dependent being is anything which is finite, meaning it has limited qualities. So like this cup of water in front of you, it has a color. It has limited physical qualities. Yes? What color is it? White. Yes? There is a depth to it, a temperature to it. These are physical limited qualities. And this is similar with regards to this universe as well, that this universe has physical limited qualities, so therefore it cannot be eternal, and anything that is eternal does not require an explanation. But this universe requires an explanation, and therefore it is dependent and finite. Now this is an argument which is mentioned from the Quran. And this is linked to the cosmological argument as well, which can be referred to as the argument from dependency. I very quickly mentioned it. There are many other arguments. There's not time to mention all of them. There are many other arguments as well. For example, the design argument. But I'm going to very quickly come to the end of my talk, and it's with regards to the atheist that claims that science has somehow disproved God. And this is very important, that the atheist claims today that science has disproved God, that there is no need for God because science has explained everything. And science, if it has not explained yet a creator, in the future it will come to an explanation with regards to the creator. Now, there are a few assumptions which an atheist makes, and I'm just going to very quickly mention them, and I mention the answer to them. Number one, the atheist that claims that science gives rise to atheism, this is a false assumption. In fact, the major philosophers of science, they themselves mention, one of the well-known philosophers of science, he mentions, in fact Gillian Baker, she says that if an atheist claims that science gives rise to atheism, this is high marks for enthusiasm but low marks for logic. And the reason for that is that science does not deal with the unobservable. Science has limitations. And the limitations of science is what? Science is a branch of knowledge which is a human endeavor in order to know what is and why is something like that, through our observation. But that means that anything that is unobserved, science does not have the answer for that. And the divine is supernatural. The divine cannot be observed. This is mentioned in the Quran. Yes, لا تدركه الأبصار وهو يدرك الأبصار. That the eyes cannot perceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but He perceives them. So anything that you can observe in this physical world is other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this physical world is unobservable. So if a science or if an atheist claims that science has somehow disproved God, this is a false assumption, because science it has never proved God. Right now it has not claimed to prove God, and in the future it will never claim to prove God, because the day science proves and tries to prove that there is a supernatural being, a non-physical being, it has crushed the very foundations of its principles. Because science talks about observable things. Science has nothing to do with unobservable things. So therefore that assumption is wrong. The other assumption is that science always leads to certainty. Science is always certain. It's grave in stone. That's a false assumption as well. Scientific theories are basically works in progress, in the sense that when a scientist comes to a conclusion with regards to a theory, that does not mean that that's the absolute answer for that phenomena. What that means is that it's the best explanation the scientist has for that moment. And we can see this throughout the history of science. If you read upon the history of science, you will see many instances in life that scientists have done a complete U-turn. A complete U-turn. For example, let me give you an example. Prior to 1950s, the scientists believed that cells were just blobs of protoplasm. They just believed that they were just protoplasm, that's it. But in 1953, Francis Crick and James Watson, they come with the idea, and they discovered the double helix structure of the DNA. And that completely disregarded the assumption of the scientists prior to them. That's a complete U-turn. Something else. And something that Einstein himself used to believe as well. They used to believe that the universe was eternal. Complete U-turn. For centuries they believed that the universe was eternal. But then again, scientists discovered that the universe is not eternal, and they came across with the Big Bang theory and so on. So there are many instances in life where science, whenever it provides a theory, it may be the best explanation at that time. Scientists never claim, in fact it is a principle of the philosophy of science that whenever a scientist comes up with a theory, it is never grave in stone. It is never set in stone. It is never absolute. In fact, when a scientist comes across another observation which contradicts the previous observation, the new observation can basically eradicate the previous one. And let me give you a very good example. You know, in this COVID pandemic, what did they say with regards to the vaccines? Subhanallah, when they first introduced them, what did they say? 100% transmission free. Yes, you will not spread COVID if you take this vaccine. What happened? What happened? From 100, there's a funny video online where they go through, first the headlines were 100%, then it went to 95%, then it went to 83%, then it went to 50% transmission free, then it went to 4%, then they said the vaccines are now related to heart disease and heart palpitations and all of these things. That's a complete U-turn. Now, I'm not against vaccines. I'm not here as an anti-vaxxer, right? I'm not talking about whether it's good or bad. I'm just saying that scientists do U-turns. So no theory in the history of science is basically what? It is not grave in stone. Scientists and scientific theories change on a daily basis. If a scientist makes a new observation, he can change that the next day. So that's one thing. Now, I was talking about the limitations of science. The limitations of science in the sense that science is only based upon observation. Observation of the human eye. For example, let me give you a quick example. The majority of science is based upon induction. Induction is what? That scientists have a look at observable phenomena, and based upon that observable phenomena, they create a conclusion upon non-observable phenomena. Let me give you a quick example. They say that if a scientist went out and he saw that all crows that they observed through the naked eye were black, they will come to the conclusion and they will create the conclusion that all crows are black. But that's not set in stone. That's not grave in stone. That's not absolute. Tell me or not, is it not rationally possible for you to find on this earth a white crow? Is it possible or not? Is it possible? It's rationally, I'm not saying there is a white crow. I'm saying it's rationally possible. So no scientific theory is set in stone and absolute. So therefore, all of these assumptions of the atheist, that science is 100% certain and science has the answers to everything, science is very limited in fact. Science is very limited in fact. In fact, it's limited to observations, limited to induction, and there are problems with induction which even scientists know that there are, within the problem or within the induction methodology. Now, inshallah ta'ala, I don't have time to continue with this talk, but the best explanation with regards to the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, summed up very quickly, is that this universe is finite and this universe is dependent. How is it dependent? Because anything that is dependent has physical limited qualities. If this universe is dependent, it must be dependent upon something else. Now, if the thing that is dependent upon, if that thing is dependent as well, then we'll have to ask what that thing prior to it is dependent upon, and will continue upon an infinite regress. We must come to an end of that chain, and it must be to a being that is uncreated, an unmoved mover, an uncreated creator that caused everything after it. And that specific being has to be eternal. It has to have maximal power. It has to be omnipotent, and it has to have will, a will to create conscious life on this earth, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability to strengthen our iman and grant us steadfastness upon the religion and Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Wa sallallahu wa sallam baraka ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.